All right, well, Sadie's on, so I've hit record. So we're recording from this point onward.
Okay. Who starts off? Do I start off by thanking you and thanking Matt Gonzalez and thanking fmsbw Press and thanking Tanya Henson, the Aspen Institute, and thanking everybody who's participating for being here on what, at least in the foothills of North Carolina, is a beautiful spring-like day?
I think you've just done it. What a great thank you roundup. That's perfect.
You're welcome, Ben.
Yeah. Well, okay, let me see if now that I'm officially a, let me see, I go to participants and let me see if I can
Jim.
spotlight.
And Ben, I know you can only see 9, but Peter Reiling, Amber Hines, and Eric Motley joined.
You know that Ben Dunlap's book launch is on right now.
Hey, Peter.
Okay,
Hey.
and well, you can access.
Hi, Ben.
Hey,
Yeah.
Ben, it's Amber.
Hey.
How are you?
And Peter, I want you to see that I have got an authentic relic of
Oh, hello.
1975.
I've got mine too. So can I just ask, because I'm kind of a Zoom nerd, a non-nerd, are you seeing both of us or are you seeing just Ben?
I'm only seeing Ben.
Okay, let me see if I can, which is more important than needing to see me, but we were gonna try to do
Tamsin, I can see you at the bottom of my screen. Ben's big and then you're little, so.
yeah, I thought I was gonna be able to spotlight
You can.
both of us, but it does not. It's most important. It's most important to see Ben.
Tamsin, I think it's each person's own option to do that, you know.
Oh, okay. I looked it up.
Set it up
Oh.
differently.
Oh,
It says,
okay. Well, I
okay,
did a
there.
little research and I was supposed to be able to pin the both of us, but as long as I can see Ben, I know I'm in the right place. And I'm going to rotate the rest of you. Hi, Peter. Hi, Prita. So wow, I can't believe we're here, Ben. We've been on a little bit of a ride together, haven't we?
I'm feeling very precariously here since I keep punching buttons and things keep changing. For a while, I could only see 2 versions of me, but now I see the 9 screens as before.
Good.
So
Good. And now we'll just move into storyteller mode. And we've always known that you're an amazing storyteller, but I don't think people realized that one day they would know you as a novelist. And this story is not something you just wrote over the last year of Shelter in Place, correct?
that's correct.
When did you start writing Famous Dogs of the Civil War, and where were you when you started?
Well, in 1989, I decided to take a break from moderating seminars for the Aspen Institute and my dual career as an English professor and a writer-producer for PBS. And I moved my family and 2 of my 3 children. My right-handed daughter was already in college at Wellesley, and she would visit, but the 4 of us, Anne and I and Susanna and Ben, moved to Thailand for 2.5 years. And for the first year, we lived in Bangkok. And then for the next 1.5 years, we lived in a little rice farming village 12 kilometers outside Chiang Mai, Wat Pang Yoi. And just after making that move, I went on a somewhat surreal speaking tour with a Hollywood screenwriter named Sterling Silliphant, who a dozen years before had won an Academy Award for writing a film called In the Heat of the Night about racial tensions in Mississippi, which also won an Academy Award. And the third speaker on our tour was a Thai filmmaker named Trichalem Yukon. And he's a prince, a member of the royal family, but also, as I said, a filmmaker whose professional name is Tan Mui. And just by sheer happenstance, well, we hit it off. Sterling Silliphant was much older. Tan Mui and I were the same age. He took me back to his studio to look at the rough cut. It was still on the Steenbeck of a film that was subsequently entered for an Academy Award in the Best Foreign Film category called The Elephant Keeper. And while I was there, he showed me a pre-publication copy, I don't know how he got it, of a book entitled My Lai Inquiry that was written by the same General Peers who had been head of the Peers Commission that officially conducted an inquiry into what happened in that notorious incident. And in reading through it and talking to Tan Mui, I learned some things that were so overwhelming to me. I had been haunted ever since December of 1969, when Ron Heberle's grim photographs of the massacre at what was then called Song Mi, but later My Lai 4, were published in Life magazine. They were a silent scream in my head. And when I moved to Southeast Asia, they were constantly in my mind. And I was so bowled over by what I'd learned that when I got back to Wat Panyoi, I banged out an entire first draft in slightly less than 3 weeks of a book that pulled all sorts of things together. I wrote it in an almost dreamlike manner. So it felt more as if I was taking dictation than I was creating something. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but it was titled then A Distant Drum, referring to the war in Vietnam, et cetera. But when I got back to the United States, I had to resume all my commitments. I mean, I was moderating seminars and teaching and making television programs and all that again. And, you know, you just can't write a 165,000 word novel in 20-minute increments. I mean, you've got to hold it all together in your mind somehow. At my wife's urging over and over, I would pick it up and work on it a little bit and then put it aside. And it was only long afterwards, after Anne had died in 2019 and really after the pandemic quarantine had begun, that I seriously started working on the novel again, really as a way of communing with her, because I had read it out loud to her, every word of it from time to time. And I would write for a day and then I would read it to her. And if I thought she nodded and laughed, I would keep what I had done. And if not, I had all the time in the world to get it straight. And of course, Tamsin, when you and I moderated that seminar for Aspen in Greece, you met Anne. And after her death, you wrote that wonderful poem, which you dedicated to her. And I set to work on Famous Dogs of the Civil War. And in effect, you became my editor. And here we are. And that's the story.
Hooray, hooray. Well, you talked about writing it almost in a dream, and well, that sounds very Dylan-esque. So we'll come back to the question of the title and the structure of the novel. But so it's, you talked about My Lai, and it is a poem where the major action occurs in 1969. So it's a novel of the 60s. You've also described it to me as a comic novel, a love story. Can you talk about just the themes for, not everyone on this has had a chance to read what is a sizable and beautiful piece of literature. So maybe give people a thumbnail on what's the backdrop, where's the action happening?
Well, you're right. It is a love story, but it's really an odd amalgam of a love story and a thriller and a comic novel, but one with serious undertones and themes, and in a sense, really a tragic comedy. And in putting them all together, I always had a working subtitle in my mind, calling it the further belated education of a white Southern liberal male. And that was very much in my mind as I wrote. Michael Dugan is the central figure of the four major characters in the novel, but I hesitate to call him a hero because, not just because he's flawed, but because his flaws precipitate so much of the comedy in the course of the novel. And at the same time, he has a modern eye for the shortcomings and foibles of the people and events around him. And that's where the satire comes in, because the first of the big underlying themes, the serious themes, is a portrait of the era itself, the 1960s, with its wars and assassinations, its beads and tambourines, its rock music, and its riots. In short, the chaotic excess of that period, and the constant sense of instability, and that is inseparable, of course, from what was going on in Southeast Asia and our misadventure there, which lasted over a decade. But the crucial part of the war in Vietnam, in many respects, coincides with the time scheme of Famous Dogs of the Civil War, which is roughly from, well, exactly from August of 1969 to August of 1970. The last of the big themes, since it takes place, the novel takes place in the two Carolinas. The last of the big themes is the American South. And that was the region that disproportionately directed, supported, and fought in the war in Vietnam, and supplied its leaders, its critics, its heroes, and its villains, also in disproportionate measure. It's about the ineradicable heritage of guilt, defeat, racism, and sexism that metastasized during that conflict in Southeast Asia. And needless to say, I was very aware as I wrote it over the last year that our current turmoil can trace its roots to those same origins. And so I felt that I was writing an historical novel in one sense, because in 1969, I might as well have been writing about World War I, as that's equidistant in time. This takes place now 50 years ago. And in that sense, it's an historical novel as well as a novel of manners. But you put it all together, and you get this very odd anomaly that, as I worked on it in the last year, it struck me as so contemporaneous.
And just to clear things up, one of the descriptors you did not use is autobiographical. So maybe, I mean, our hero, our flawed hero, Michael Dugan, is a former Rhodes Scholar, comes back to the South, enters academia. There are some parallels in biography here, but I want to give you a chance to explain, respond to that, lest anyone think this is a veiled portrait of Ben Dunlap.
I wrote about the things I know, and that includes the American South and Southeast Asia, motorcycle wrecks, and the hothouse whirl of academe. But I did not do all of the things that Michael Dugan does. Some of them, perhaps. I guess he's the Mr. Hyde to my Dr. Jekyll, but nonetheless, it's not autobiographical.
Okay, good. And the narrator is Caitlin Rosen, who we meet right at the beginning. And maybe it would be good for people just to hear her voice and begin to know the characters a little bit. So I know you have an excerpt from the opening monologue picked out. Why don't we hear?
I do. Let me say that she has 3 interior monologues as well as appearances in the course of the story. One in the middle of the novel and one at the end, as well as one at the beginning. And it is she who 50 years later, in 2019, is thinking back over the previous half century and remembering the story that we read, all of it. So it's all filtered through her as a kind of narrator. And when she starts out, we don't know that she's talking about herself. She says, now where would she's remembering, and it all comes back of a piece in her mind, the way one sometimes remember, not sequentially, but everything all at once. She remembers the past, and she says, now how will we start? We should probably start with Caitlin Rosen. The titles of the different sections, there are 6 sections in the novel, and the titles all come from the liner notes from Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited. Yeah, I've got my copy here too. Okay. And somebody else, was it Peter? Somebody else had his copy there. So, okay, the first section is entitled Time Does Not Interfere. That's the phrase from Dylan's liner notes. And the epigraph is from St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 5:1. It is reported commonly that there is fornication among you. That's the point at which the novel begins with Caitlin's interior monologue. Strange for me to be wondering now about where we actually were back then, in our heads, I mean, in our screwed up lives, while the rest of the world was going to hell with battle, murder, and sudden sex. Sorry, I have to wear my Walgreens glasses to read this. Strange for me to be wondering now about where we actually were back then, in our heads, I mean, in our screwed up lives, while the rest of the world was going to hell with battle, murder, and sudden sex, at least one of which had just taken place. If it's Caitlin Rosen we're talking about, and the story that I've kept telling myself for what's been close to 50 years without my ever getting it straight, at least in terms of who wronged whom and mitigating circumstances, if that's how the 60s should be described, like grabbing for beads at Mardi Gras. Part of the problem's in how it's told, since it's got to include a loop-de-loop, like what's it called, an epicycle, beginning when summer's just about done in the first year of a new decade, then doubling back 12 months or so and cruising in forward gear from there until everything's back in orbit again, except for whatever's been lost for good. Presidents, protesters, husbands, wars, all but the last were gone by then. So we'll focus on Caitlin at the start, if only because on that crucial day when her classes at school are about to resume, she's all too aware of where she is, alone in her bed on South Gregg Street in a heavily mortgaged one-story house in Columbia, South Carolina. But until only a minute or two ago, in an in flagrante delicto embrace, which theologically at least has dumped her into limbo. Now, that wouldn't have unnerved everyone. So it's also important to note that she's a renegade Catholic, or if you could hear the still small voice that's nagging away unseen, an unregenerate hypocrite, like most of the precedents she'd invoke in defending herself, if she could. Several will soon be saints, she'd say. And what do still small voices know about how a mixed up body feels? She knows her peak is fabricated. It's the Irish in her, she'd contend, a fractiousness laced with knee-jerk defiance and the hint of maybe an alibi too. She's in a quandary, that I'll concede, though not wanting to seem too biased on her behalf, but knowing her as I do, I'll predict what's going to happen next. I think she'll resort to prayer. So that's how I would choose to depict her first, sprawling alone in a mussed-up bed while attempting to frame a contrite excuse. I'd mention in an ironic way that in her own mind, at least, she and the author of creation have reached a mutual understanding that she won't impinge on his mercy and time with offenses of a venial sort. But I'd have to note the further detail that the person with whom she shared her bed is her former husband's former best friend, which of course is the heart of the matter. Next, I would reconstruct that morning's events, how the mattress had sunk and risen again as that person unnamed, will reveal who it was, got up and stealthily left her bed. It could have been anyone, really, she thinks, but rejects at once such a clumsy approach in leveling with the Almighty. She had opened her eyes and glanced at the clock, 5:05 in the digital world, remembered what's scathingly on her mind, an act she'd vowed she'd never commit. And while idly surveying the dimly lit room, trouser socks and boxer shorts and a trail that leads from the bedroom door past the legs of an overturned wicker chair and album covers strewn on the floor like upturned cards from a tarot deck, the topmost with a wary Bob Dylan decked out in a Triumph Bonneville shirt, she had more or less started her prayer. That's definitely where her story begins. And I'll do my best to tell the truth, even if it's not edifying. How she's peering about at her surroundings, including the umber. I'm sorry, is there feedback or something?
I don't want to do this. I want to teach him.
But not right now.
Not right now.
I see.
He can come to your bridge lessons if he
I agree
chooses
with
to.
David. Every time I play, I learn, and I just want to play. I don't want to.
Janet, I think we can hear you. Thank you.
Now everything's mute. Am I on? You can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, back where we were. So that was actually a good breaking point. I mean, at least hiatus point. That's definitely where her story begins. And I'll do my best to tell the truth, even if it's not edifying. How she's peering about at her surroundings, including the umber Rothko-like smudge of a fully extended window shade and the hieroglyph of a dangling bra, though her mind's now focused on what she's done and how to present her orison. Not sure if that should be sung or not, knowing it's hardly news to him that exactly as the nuns had predicted, she's back in a steaming bed of sin, gaffed and pitched from her choir girl sleep and into a concupiscent sty with a rabbit-strewn granny gown, tangled and stained, floating like pond scum over her hips. She'd probably like such Baroque prose, though from this point on, she'll be on her own. Lord, she'll start out, still in her mind, testing to see if anyone's there. You know I'm not one to quibble, Lord, but really, it's not adultery if recently widowed as I am, her husband Danny's 4 months dead. I'm weak when it comes to consolation. She hears an angry growl erupt from somewhere else inside her head and knows that problem looms as well. The sulking golem's crazed reproach, insisting she's somehow done him wrong. Her mouth moves as she shapes his name. It's not just that, she'll add to her plea, addressing the Lord of all again. What hurts so much is knowing he's gone, which makes remorse beside the point. And you know I never nitpick, Lord, but if I'm to blame, as I humbly concede, so is that lying Kenmore machine that made me look so ready to rumble. With a rueful expression, she closes her eyes, composing her vaguely pre-Raphaelite face, which, depending on someone's point of view, is either bewitching or frankly plain, half sensual and half austere, with bluish white skin and sienna-hued lips framed by a nimbus of reddish hair that curls like the beard of a Ninevite king, or, as Danny was fond of pointing out, like the coat of an Irish setter. She muses on that before she thinks of what she'll include in her appeal, for Danny first, and then for herself. I know they're doctrinal issues, Lord, but surely among the three of you, there's room to squeeze him in as well. Or if purgatory's still in the cards, lodge him for a semester or two on one of those terraces near the top, among the lechers and the wit. My own predicament, as you see, is what to do with Scaramouche, who's gone swaggering off just down the hall to have himself a lordly pee, while I'd dither and have this chat with you before I look him in the eye and say whatever I'm going to say, which depends on what your answer is. If what's at stake is, here she pauses to fake it through, hacking away with Occam's razor as if it were a palette knife, a skill she's come by only of late as a middle school teacher of Western art, who at 29 is trusted by students half her age, who think of her more as an artist herself because she draws so fluently and stutters so badly when she talks that nothing she says seems condescending. Whether it's love or lust, she'll close, framing the issue she confronts. Or both, she'll add. It could be both. Ask Mary Magdalene if she's there, or better yet, ask Dorothy Day, with whom I trust you're on positive terms. Then opening her eyes again and fearful she might have overstepped since Dorothy Day can fend for herself, she glances at the magazines fanned over the table by her bed, the ones her cronies also read. The latest issue of Rolling Stone with Jerry Garcia peeking out, a tattered and coffee-stained great speckled bird, and 2 or 3 art news in a stack sitting atop a Catholic worker to which she subscribes for a quarter a year. So that's the opening voice. It goes on to just a bit longer.
Okay, so I definitely think we need to do an audio book, right? Are we agreed? Okay. And I also just want to say, we're going to spend a couple more, Ben has one more section to read. I'm going to be super short with my questions because you have all these friends here, and I know I want to open it up so other people can ask questions and say hi. And I'm going to leave the question about the title and the structure of the novel to Peter Reiling. So Peter, you'll be asking that question. But before we get to the next reading, Ben, what we just experienced with you is not only the brilliance of your writing as well as your delivery, of course, but language is a plot driver it's also a commentary in this novel. You use, let me say, period language that would not be condoned today, but you place it in the mouths of some of your characters. You also do interesting things with Caitlin's voice. She just mentions the stutter in that section. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenging language, and also how you use the language of your characters as a way to communicate something that you want the readers to feel and understand?
Yes, I can tell you, knowing him as well as I do, that Michael Dugan's eyesight is not all that good. I don't confide this in the novel, but he suffers from something called Duane syndrome, which means that he really has no binocular depth perception. So in fact, the 60s were above all an age of rock music and movies, and Dugan is teaching movies as well as literature, and he's obsessed with film. Almost everybody was back in the 60s. And that gets very convoluted and complicated. Dugan sees the world the way he sees a movie screen in 2 dimensions, but he's very acute in both smell and hearing. And everybody in the novel has a distinctive habit of speech, an accent, a dialect, and in Caitlin's case, a stutter. Though, as you pointed out, of course, a person with a stutter does not stutter when she thinks. So you don't hear that initially, which helps confuse the issue about whether she's Caitlin or not. But yes, some of the things that are reported would be offensive today. And I think it's terribly important. I would not call Michael Dugan a hero because his own flaws are so conspicuous. And I've said he himself, with his shortcomings, precipitates so much of the comedy in the course of the novel. Every single offensive remark that he makes comes back to haunt him in the course of the novel. So don't throw it away in the first few pages because you think, no, this is just deeply offensive. That's part of the further education that Dugan is going to undergo almost as soon as the novel starts. But Dugan himself has a kind of, let me see how I should describe it, a flippant, impulsive streak. He's very quick, and sometimes he speaks too quickly, and in a jaunty fashion. And that's really a crucial part of the story. It's also, if one is reaching back 50 years, if one is trying to grasp what was really going on in the 60s, really trying to understand, especially the habits of mind that were typical of the American South at that time, and typical of people who are persuaded they're enlightened liberals, you know, without seeing the beams in their own eye. And that's all very much part of the story. It's also true that many of the characters, especially Caitlin and Rose Lee, whom we really haven't talked about yet, they use their distinctive modes of speech, a stutter in one case and an accent in the other, very adroitly, very knowingly. And that's part of the story too, because it's not just that everybody has secrets, everybody has unrevealed aspects of his or her character. And Rose Lee's character especially, I'll just go ahead and say that she appears initially as a mysterious stranger, and even in a perils of Pauline sort of situation. And it's difficult for Dugan and for the reader to see her as a real life three-dimensional person, as opposed to what seems to be a familiar sort of narrative cliche. Mm-hmm. The mysterious stranger arrives, disrupting everything. So that's a long-winded answer, but it covers a lot of ground.
No, it's perfect. And to me, that was one of the most powerful elements of the novel, was just to, you know, so much of modern life, I think, is these labels of this is okay, that's not okay. And we lose an understanding not only of how far we've come in some regards, but of even characters, their own ability to utilize language and respond to language in a way that can be very empowering, as opposed to just sort of victimizing. So I think it would be great if you dipped back into the dialogue, because I think we'll get a flavor of some of that language. And plus, I know people just want to listen to you. So let's do that.
Well, okay. Let me say that Dugan's shortcomings will be on display in this passage. And in fact, what I'm going to do is read a passage involving Dugan and Rose Lee, and I'll need to set it up just a bit, and then I'll skip and read an even shorter passage involving Danny Rosen, who's married to Caitlin and who is Michael Dugan's best friend from childhood. They'd grown up together there in this fictitious town called Cumbria, the capital of South Carolina. Actually, I'm a native of Columbia, South Carolina, and I don't think this is going to buy me any reprieve from people at home who dislike what I say about the city, but it is a fictional place. And Dugan is on his way home on his motorcycle, his little Honda 125. You know, he can't get easy rider and The Great Escape, that sort of thing, out of his mind. He thinks he's Dennis Hopper or Peter Fonda. And on his way home in the back streets of Cumbria, in the rain, in the dark, he passes a power company relay station, and instead of being shut down, it's a Saturday, and at night, and he sees what looks like a work gang with lights, and they're tying down a tarpaulin of some sort. He slows just enough to look more closely, and he sees actually it's some kind of assault taking place, and the victim is a woman who's kicking and fighting, and impulsively he decides that he's going to intervene and save the damsel. And he rides in on his motorized skateboard, as one person refers to that little motorcycle. And in the course of going after the assailants, he's cudgeled. A half dozen thugs with kashes of one sort or another, and he takes a severe blow to the head and one to the shoulder, but he keeps on going, and he pulls off one miracle after another. He at first finds that the woman believes he's another assailant, and she's reluctant, but eventually he tugs her onto the back of the bike. And at this point, a red convertible that he had seen parked outside the gate launches a pursuit, and he can't get back out on the road. So he starts up along the right of way of a railroad track. And just before the red convertible catches up with him, he hits a tie and pulls off an acrobatic feat in which, with the girl over his one good shoulder, he manages to climb up the ladder of a seaboard railway train that had slowed up for the curve, and they're managing to escape pursuit. He hasn't seen her clearly in the dark and in the rain, and he knows the terrain they're passing through. They get to the outskirts of town, and he knows they've got to get off the train because it'll speed up. I mean, he knows exactly the place where he ought to get off, by a barbecue called Piggy Parlor that has a neon sign with a pig dancing in a pot. It twitches back and forth. He actually misses that chance, and just afterwards, he leaps off the train, having explained exactly what he's going to do. And she, who is not very responsive, certainly not very grateful, says she's not getting off. But he manages a one-armed descent. And when he looks around, he discovers she has gotten off after all. He doesn't know why. And at that point, they're setting out. He'd seen a glow beyond some trees, and he hopes that's a place where he can find a payphone and call his friend Danny to the rescue, at least as a getaway. So we'll pick it up there. She follows him over the spongy field until they get to a high top road, skirting a pair of shotgun shacks, one of them with a tin roof shed and a lunatic dog that convulses with rage while yanking dementedly on its chain. Because of the dog, they leave the road and blunder into a drainage ditch. Gingerly, he clambers in while she vaults over it in a bound. "Shut up!" yells someone from the house as Dugan sinks past his ankles in muck. With boots like snowshoes, he climbs out, making some noisome smelling tracks. The barking stops, then starts again. He stamps both feet. A light comes on. She's waded back into the ditch. "What's wrong?" he asks. She gestures. "What?" "Can't find my shoe." The dog is frenzied. "Leave it." "No." "Okay," he sighs, indulging her. He wades in too, spots something dark that he plucks free, then watches as tandoori style she claps it back onto her foot. He sees she's slender, supple too. Much more than that, he still can't say, except for something in her stance, her shoulders, how she holds her head, a dancer or a gymnast, maybe both. A door slams as they move away. The dog subsides, the light goes out, and soon they reach an asphalt road. The rain has now completely stopped, but heading slowly up a hill amid soft sounds of dripping leaves and smells of wet dirt from the fields. They tense at the sound of grinding gears approaching them rapidly from behind. A battered pickup seems to slow, then honking and swerving races past to Dugan's undisguised relief. No friends or foes in this neck of the woods, and even the glow he had glimpsed before has disappeared behind the trees. But as they top a modest rise, there's a glare like an open fridge up ahead, no more than 100 yards away. A 7-Eleven, Dugan sees, and in just a few minutes, they're scanning the lot. 2 cars, a pickup and a van, plus a row of pumps, an ice machine, a trailer sign, drink Mountain Dew, ignored by the hunkering curbside crew who are drinking instead from paper bags with bottles of some sort tucked inside. Thunderbird is Dugan's guess, aware that though they look benign, they might be Huey Newton types. Stay close, he tells her quietly, supposing that in the wino's eyes, the figure they most probably cut is like an ambushed Bonnie and Clyde. She's fiddling with her mud-caked shoes. He turns to the rehabs, hunkering down. Hi, guys. God loves you, so does Allah. Trying again to figure things out. Assuming he didn't abet a crime and that her muggers have lost the trail, that they've got a working payphone inside and Danny hadn't been blowing smoke about staying home for JLM, the Jesus Loves Me network of stars. His chances of making his way back home, if not intact, at least piecemeal, are better than they'd formerly seemed. Though there's still the wildcat woman or girl, and what if she takes a notion to yell, I'm being abducted against my will, or says to him, I'm Donkey's friend. He holds the door. She hesitates. He looks at her and feels that wave, the one he had glimpsed far out to sea, is heaving much closer towards him now, but he's still flotsam, bobbing about, while she's whatever, he's not sure, an Asian of some sort, it appears. Viet Cong for all he knows, but Chinese probably in these parts, maybe Korean, who can say? He thinks of the sprinter, what's her name? The one who's always on TV, Chi Ching, that's it. Wide world of sports, same plum pit eyes and spilled ink hair, but taller and slimmer, he tells himself. Thighs must be like Chi Ching's too, python-like, could crush a man. Aye, he hears inside his head as he recoils from his own id. Steer clear of that. That's not for him. She's paused to read his prurient thoughts and apparently reached the same conclusion. Though it's not about race, he tries to insist, catching her disdainful look and answering with a wordless reproach. Whatever's happening in Canton, he's a regular at the Bamboo House and way too hip to order chop suey. This only takes a millisecond. Then she's inside, and so is he. You come in here to buy anything? A voice behind the counter barks, disrupting his traumatized train of thought that's running through stills from Shanghai Express and glamour pics of Anna May Wong. He hears the challenge and knows the type. Small face, big hair, bulldog frame, a surly Pekingese sneer, a dwarf blown up to monstrous size. Are you just messing up my floor? The phone, he mutters, chattering. Wet clothes plus Arctic chill AC further impede what he's trying to do. Put his one good hand in the opposite pocket. He fishes up a dollar bill. She points to the payphone on the wall. So use it. Right, I need some change. Can't open the cash box unless you buy. Buy what? She shrugs 2 meaty arms that wobble in a famous way. Something to do with Danny, he thinks, from Wrestle Riot on TV. And then it suddenly dawns on him. It's Awful Una, former local megastar, known in the trade as the Constrictor. So what in the world's she doing here? The synchronicity, surreal. Candid camera? Too far-fetched. He thinks he'd better play it straight. Some Tic Tacs then. Some what? You know, those little mints in plastic tubes. Her face is like a wheel of brie. No sign she's grasped a thing he said. Excuse me, am I getting through? What you see here is what we got. No sweat. Let's see, I'll have a Slurpee. She studies the cup rack overhead. Cola, he adds. Uh-huh, what size? That little one there, I just won't change. He's nauseated anyhow. That there's a jumbo. Whatever, he says, the smallest you got. This here? She asked. For God's sake, lady, jumbo or peewee, that one there. She narrows her eyes, then grunts and turns. A bantam? He hears her smugly say, as if he's made a big mistake. She puts a plastic rooster cup under a nozzle that, burping twice, evacuates a brownish ooze. She slides it onto the countertop. We're out of straws. He takes the cup. You what? He huffs. That's 39 cents. This stuff's no good without a straw. Aisle 2, top right, you want them so bad. She plucks the dollar from his hand. There's some down there, they're Dixie Belle. Then you're not out. You want them or not? They're 50 cents. Yeah, sure I want them. Give me my change. 44 straws in every box. You open them up plus 2-cent tax. She counts it out, then counts again. That's 9-cent change. I need a dime. She shuts the drawer. God damn it, wait. You watch your mouth. His wallet's gone. He looks around. Shi Ching's gone too. He understands that he's been stiffed. You see her leave? She doesn't reply. That woman who came in here with me, the Oriental, Una sniffs. She left right after you come in, red Mustang out there blinking its lights while you went on about them straws. The red convertible, sure, of course. A truck speeds by as he opens the door, an 18-wheeler spitting mist, its mud flaps sparkling crimson-eyed. Watching its headlights rape the trees, he feels an operatic pause before the chorus pitches in, the curbside gallery planted there to back his plaintive, where's my Bess? She long gone, man, the first one croons. That's all she wrote. That's right, uh-huh. So now he gets it, more or less. Putting his Slurpee on a crate, he reaches up to scratch his head and finds he's got a helmet on. Amazing how that slipped his mind, but then his mind is having to cope with whatever bashed the helmet in. He runs a finger over the dent and knows for sure that he's been had. Busting his arm while smashing his bike, saving the girl, but losing his dough. It's classic, right? Been down so long it looks like up, and losing the girl in green knee socks. Farina died on the back of a bike, though Chi was sockless, he reflects, and but for his nausea, he concedes the Slurpee's not half bad.
All right, I'm gonna open it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't introduced Danny, but I think that's enough. That's enough reading. But Danny fares better.
Leave them wanting a bit more, so they'll order the.
Ben, good morning. It's Peter. Good to see you. Good to see
Hey,
everyone.
Peter. Hey, same here.
I am not buying this book until it's on tape. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Of course, we all want to know about this title. Where on earth? Famous Dogs of the Civil War.
Yeah, it does come from the liner notes for Highway 61. You revisit the greatest single album of the 60s, in my estimation, and probably yours too, because we agree on a lot of things about Dylan. But the phrase takes on special meaning for Dugan and Danny in the course of the novel. Baffling though it may be to some, I notice on Amazon, Famous Dogs of the Civil War is grouped with books about the Battle of Gettysburg and Robert E. Lee's Horse Traveler. And I'm just wondering what Civil War buffs and dog fanciers will make of Famous Dogs of the Civil War when they get hold of it. But and there are dogs, they're real life dogs that are fairly prominent in the novel, but they're figurative dogs too, Danny and Dugan being two of them. And they're only famous to those who know them, of course. The Civil War refers not just to the conflict of North and South a century before, but to the war that's going on in Vietnam, which really was a civil war. And then as well, it seemed the more violent the war in Vietnam became, the more we tried to confine that violence to Southeast Asia, the more it broke out in our midst at home. And the turmoil at home also took on a sense of civil war, largely generational, but not entirely. And by 1969, even in the South, where protests were occurring. So famous dogs of the Civil War cuts in all sorts of directions. And that's the basic relevance of the title. Yeah, but I should also explain. I've got something else to tell you now that I see you smiling. Dugan, in his desultory career as a scholar, is working on Joyce throughout the novel. The liner notes, when you read them, are like a satirical, surreal take on Finnegan's Wake or something. And just as Joyce based his masterpiece Ulysses on Homer's Odyssey, so Famous Dogs of the Civil War is actually based on the liner notes. I mean, the narrative structure of my novel actually follows the liner notes, and they're hints throughout the novel. I talk about Savage Rose and Fixable, and I talk about the Insanity Factory and the Wipeout Gang. They all take on parts in my novel. So my novel is based on the liner notes. I mean, it's a come down from the 1920s in Joyce, from Homer to, the back of an album scrawled by Bob Dylan. But Famous Dogs is based on the liner notes in the same way that Ulysses is based on Homer.
And thus we
because
all
after
know
all,
the true meaning of a pear, right?
Exactly. And I just want to say that of course, Bob Dylan is our bardic Homer. And I know Peter won't disagree with that.
Awesome. Feel free. Anybody else have a question or comment?
Oh, somebody asked something.
We do this every week.
I thought Eve Blossom was asking for a book club, so we'll discuss it. We'll see. I think an audio book would be kind of fun though.
Or both.
Is there an audio version coming?
With the FMSB FMSB Press, we've only done print books. We're not doing Kindle. I don't know, Matt. We'll have to talk about an audio version and explore what goes into that. But I think it would be wonderful. So we'll see if we can sort that.
Well, I've already ordered my hard, but boy, to hear that voice would be spectacular.
Yeah, agreed.
How did this experience change you, Ben? I'm curious how it kind of fits into your journey.
The experience of writing the book?
Writing the book, yeah.
I dedicated it to Anne and to 3 other people. It really, she's in it throughout. And my delight in writing it was in the sense of communing with her. I mean, we were married for 56 years, and that meant more to me than anything. And so it was the writing of it. When I was younger, and probably even when I wrote that first draft back in 1989, might as well have been 1889. I don't think I was writing for fame. You know, sometimes you write because you just feel you have to. And in this case, I wrote because I really wanted to. You know, I don't want to overemphasize the combination of grief for the loss of my wife and the isolation of quarantine. But the writing of the novel really was the thing I remember best. That means most to me. But I've got others because I didn't stop writing. And I basically, in the course of that year, I wrote over 500,000 words. And so I've got a novella that's going to follow not very long from now, and then at least the first volume of a sort of memoir. They're all very offbeat. They're not what anybody would expect. And I don't know. The other thing, Preeta, that I think I kind of feel, you know, when I became a college president, I agreed in effect to play a certain role. And that meant that I didn't transgress propriety. And I think the people who knew me in that role might have expected a King Lear instead of a Lolita. And I feel like I've resurrected an important portion of myself, even though I might well be denounced in public for doing so. I don't think the Methodist bishops who oversaw Walford College had this in mind, but anyhow, that's another story.
So Ben, Preeta's question, it seems to me, is really very profound, because it's not often that we get a chance to see a young writer like you make his debut as a novelist. And then we're very much interested in what you are in the process of becoming now, because I've always believed that the best is yet to come. And quite clearly, you have discovered yourself as a writer and a published writer, so we can hardly wait. What are we going to see, and what are you going to learn about yourself?
Well, you know, I've always been a writer, and I see that array of awards atop your bookcase. And, you know, you and I both labored in that vineyard. You rather more successfully than I, but we did a lot of work in public television and for other networks. So I guess freed of the constraints of production. You know, at one point when I picked Famous Dogs up again, without getting very far, I converted the whole thing into a screenplay. That is, I mean, I wrote it to be read, but with interior, you know, with all the directions for the camera and the director that a wishful thinking screenwriter would put in, which would be ignored, of course, in production. But this is a continuation for me, not a radical departure. At least I feel that way.
It just seems like there's much astonishment, but not among this body here. I suspect there is absolutely no surprise to what you are bringing to us, because it is you, and it is you in process. And that's the thing.
Well, thank you. When I was 38 years old and resumed my interrupted ballet career, the range of reactions from people who were astonished and appalled to my immense satisfaction in doing something that I really love doing was that same sort of, you know, it's nice to go on unfolding and growing and becoming something other than you had been, at least something that you hadn't completed becoming. And you have always been my model in that regard, Keith. So, and you're a decade ahead of me, and nothing has slowed you up.
I feel the breath on my neck. The other question I wanted to put is to Tamsin, because she also is a novelist making her appearance now in the same series, and she has been your actually your advisor as you've gone along with this in all aspects of it. So what can you tell us, Tamsin? I know we're going beyond the time you set, but anyhow.
Oh, well, like Ben, this was a novel that, in my case, I was writing at the end of the 1990s as I was leaving Washington, D.C., getting ready to head west. And these characters sort of sat in a drawer, but they I carried them around in my heart and in my imagination for decades. And so one of the questions I was going to ask Ben was very much based on my own experience of the kind of just the joy of being able to give these characters that you birthed life beyond you, to me has felt absolutely amazing. And, like Ben, I've written in other forms and, published poems and things like that, but there is something about a novel, the creation of an entire world that feels very singular. And, in my case, I'm already thinking, okay, well, where am I going to take some of the characters now, some of the lesser characters or less visible characters, maybe they should be the center for, the next thing. I've always loved serial novels. So that's what it sparked. But I don't know, Ben, how does it feel to have these folks roaming around for other people to meet?
Well, I have to say that in the case of Exile, I love what I took to be a revelation of you in some sense, and the early part of your career when you were in Washington, and drawing on that world, at least, if not revealing things about yourself. I delighted in that. And in my case, I have to say, I didn't feel I was inventing anything. Those people were already there when I began writing. If anybody is going to be accused of insensitivity, prurience, or sedition, it should be one of them, not me.
Duly noted.
Ben, this is Tanya. I had the pleasure of having many breakfasts with you at the Aspen Meadows, and I could have listened to your stories and your memories through lunch and dinner, but I was never allowed to sit with you at lunch and dinner. What sorts of memories did this experience bring up that perhaps you'd forgotten, or what are some of the moments that were part of your personal journey in writing this?
I think, in a way, exorcising an entirely different kind of ghost. I love the idea of tragic comedy. I mean, it's terribly important to me that the hero in this novel is badly flawed, not just someone who comes in with all the answers and tells a story, or is the central figure in a story that's going to make various moral points. It really was. It was about the anguish of the war in Vietnam. A very close friend was killed among the very earliest casualties in the war, American casualties in the war. And again, a student of mine to whom I was very close, who'd come from a sort of ghetto, an African-American, was killed in heartbreaking fashion. And I actually got a card from him. In those days, the troops, it was written on a K-rations card, and he could just submit the card, and without any postage, it would be mailed. And I got it. I got it just after I learned of his death. And of course, My Lai. was everything awful and abhorrent. And this really is a story of finding a reason for the human race to survive in the midst of such terrible revelations of what human nature is capable of. And among the things that I've only hinted at, communing with Anne was terribly important to me. But in my initial draft, I was really trying to come to terms with my reaction to what happened in Vietnam. I mean, it's like the Holocaust, in a sense that you struggle to find some reason to believe that the world is better off with the human race on this planet, and that does emerge in the course of the story. I didn't really mean to get that emotional, but yeah, that's a crucial part of it. Now I'm worried about if I was such a blowhard during our breakfast. I remember you talking, Tanya. Did I really?
No, you were a delight. We also shared a drive to Denver. We also shared the hunt for your luggage one time. So I had lots of chances to commune with you.
I remember every second of it. Yeah.
Well, as long as people don't mind going on a little bit, we're 10 past, but I'm not going anywhere. So was that you, Anne?
Yeah. Ben, you mentioned towards the end of your introductory remarks that, of course, your book had stirred up a lot of relevances in what's going on in the world today. And I'd like to hear you talk about that, because it's so surprising to me that there's so many links from the kind of political turmoil today to various historical events in American history. What do you see any connection between today and Vietnam, the Vietnam era, that strike you as something that we've really got to think about?
Absolutely. I mean, I do think there's it's almost like a clockwork device in which every half century things resurface that haven't been resolved. I mean, that seems almost to be an inescapable historical dynamic, but the way in which we prefer to rewrite history instead of confronting it, and the persistence of the past, especially, at least in the South, of the forget hell variety, and the prominence of the stars and bars Confederate flags in the recent storming of the Capitol, and the racism and the sexism, and all of those things that those of us of an age remember from the past, and find ourselves, I think, aggrieved that they're coming back even more virulently than before. I don't have an easy answer for that, except it ought to instruct us in how to deal with the past. The whole business of memory and the way it works. I mean, it's not like putting diamonds in a bank vault and retrieving them from time to time and finding them the same. The way we treat the past is not just a matter of lying to ourselves. It's also the fact that long-term memory is more like a snowball in a bank vault. It's like a photographer's proofs that fade a bit more every time they're re-examined. Except with memory, what happens is it's not just our deliberate distortion. There is a tendency, because we forget details, to slightly alter the story with each retrieval, adjusting them in normative ways. And those normative ways are ideas that are affected by maybe what other people think, as some have recently speculated, but also the cliches that we absorb from myths and fairy tales and novels and movies. So eventually, what troubled us so much about the past becomes more acceptable, but it means that the past is not really past, as William Faulkner once said. And that's our current problem, much of it.
And to your point, Ben,
Hey, Eve. Hey.
hey, I wanted to just add to that, you know, I lived in Vietnam for a couple of years and I would go work there. And when I was seeing in the early 90s, these men come back to Vietnam, they were coming back because you were talking about this memory for them in the past and this meaning, looking back for this meaning of what did it mean to be in Vietnam. And they were just opening up Vietnam in early 90s. These men for the first time could go back. And then seeing them struggle with the desire to come back, to have like a closure or meaning or what have you, and then having a somatic experience when they got off the planes of actually, you know, physically being there and really feeling like that humid air and that rush of feelings that they felt and just having to deal with that. So I just wanted to, I didn't mean to cut anyone off. I just, in that moment of what you just said, it really brought up that I remember them telling me these stories of them conflicted and all this and where they were in their lives in their 90s, you know, like it had been 20 years. What does it mean for 20 years to pass and still be holding on to some of these memories?
You know, if the other three people to whom I dedicated the book are Hugh C. Thompson, Lawrence Coben, and Glenn Andreatta. And if you don't know who they are and you plan to read the book first. Don't look them up. But I met two of the three, and I was so overcome that I burst into tears, and I just cursed myself because they thought I was also a vet, and that and it wasn't that. I wept at the grandeur of what they became, men with simple backgrounds who rose heroically to an occasion.
And I wanted to ask a follow-up along the lines of that episode. When did it become so that the events at My Lai sort of trickled out over the years, right? And
right.
When did that particular event that you're describing now, the helicopter landing, when did that become clear to all parties? I suspect it wasn't the same year, or was
it? And even when it did, I mean, the great issue was, well, in effect, regarded by some, and including the senator from South Carolina, as mutiny. So the Army, it was decades before the Army was willing to acknowledge it, and then they awarded the medals as a way of dismissing it. And the full story just came out bit by bit. I mean, the initial reports by Ron Roddenauer were made, did not include them, but the investigation by the Peers Commission did. And from then on, the story grew, and now the Wikipedia entries, which I just recently checked, are quite detailed. And yet, I don't think one American out of 100 recognizes and honors those names as they should.
Hey, you could put me on that list until I read the book. I hadn't heard that part of the story. So it was quite an epiphany. Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. That, yes, thank you, Kevin, so much.
Also, Ben, while I'm speaking, just one last thought. I would be disappointed if you don't name some future work of yours. What is it? Sanskrit Puns in Finnegan's Wake? That begs to be the title of something, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
as Ben mentioned, there is a novella coming, and at least the first volume of a memoir. So more good things coming from FMSBW Press and Ben Dunlap, and we'll do more readings, won't we?
Yes, thank you so much, Ben. It's been a highlight of my Sunday, my week, my month, my COVID, just to spend a little bit of time with you. So thanks for doing this, Tamsin and Ben. It's been a pleasure.
How lovely of you. Thank you. Okay, shall we say goodbye now then, for the time being?
I think so. I think so. But everybody can come off mute and say farewell.
Love you, Ben Dunlap.
Thank you, Ben.
We love you, Ben.
Love you, Ben.
Thank you so much,
Oh,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Absolute joy.
Wonderful seeing everybody and
Hey,
listening.
Ben,
So-
there's Mike
Hey,
Kincaid. I didn't know I love you, but I love you now.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks, Tamsin. Great to see you
Yeah.
all. Bye-bye.
Pleasure,
Good-
pleasure.
Everybody.
Go Bears.
Peter, Jeff,
Thank you, Tamsin.
you guys.
Thanks,
So good.
Keith. Bless you.
Sheena, Keith,
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
bye.
So much.
Hmm.
Ben Skip Battle came on camera. I don't know if you can see him.
He's still there.
He's on mute. Let's see if we can get him off mute.
Yeah, let me see if I can.
Yep, let's hear a word. Yes.
Speak up. Yeah, this has been a terrific morning. It's just turned noon out here. God, it feels like a warm bath on a sunny day.
It's good to see you looking well, Skip. Haven't heard for a long.
Touch wood.
Here.
All right, well, we're going to get that novella out as quickly as we can so that we can get back together with alacrity, because this has been a boon to the soul.
Tamsin, so good.
Oh, and Keith, thank you for your very kind comment. That was very That was very sweet of you. Thank
I
you.
trust you're going to have a launch for your own book.
Maybe I haven't. I'm shy about these things, but maybe.
Don't be shy.
All
Don't be
right.
shy.
No, we should have a big launch for it, Tamsin. Big
Oh,
one.
okay. Well, maybe so. So, all right. Well, I love you all.
Thank
And
you,
Dan,
one and
great
all.
to see you
Bye-bye.
too.
Here. This has been just
Thanks,
terrific.
Tanya.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.